like to thank you for the time you're taking to share your knowledge and some of your experiences. I know you're a busy guy and with a lot of work, and I assure you that this will be of extreme value to many of us who are studying hard to follow a path like yours. Greatly appreciate your generosity. I know that you have been on the road with big artists that are now part of the history of pop music. I'd like to ask you, what are the things that you consider important when approaching gigs like these, when there are so many expectations and high pressures always to perform at the highest level? Also, how much of this pressure comes from yourself?
Well, I mean, I think that you know, being a professional in any line of work, the pressure is built in. Everybody or the goal to be a great professional in any line of work is to have the pressure of yourself to do a good job. I think at some point when you become really comfortable and good at what you do, the pressure is not so much about the day in and day out. Okay, I hope I play good tonight, or I hope I do a good job tonight, as much as just maintaining a sort of overall level of quality. So, when you're young, early gigs, you'd start being nervous about, okay, I want to play good tonight. And at some point you get comfortable with the fact that you're just going to do a good job, but the pressure is then about maintaining a quality. I think in music it's staying relevant with styles, staying current, not getting stuck into too many old patterns, and, not sounding dated. It's a problem a lot, is, staying current and relevant. In terms of playing with big artists, the most important thing for me about that is realizing that you are not the artist, and that a singer has, different needs for a different kind of artist. So when I toured with Julio, I had to realize that I was coming straight out of jazz school and playing fusion and all kinds of very heavy music, and with a lot of technique and a lot of harmonic knowledge, and realizing that gig didn't require that. That required more of a level of finesse and just making yourself fit into what the artist is doing. When I played with Julio or Christian Castro or with Barry Gibb, it's like you have to, and it's the same in the studio, is you're serving the artist and the music the artist does to make them sound as good as possible. It's not about you anymore. It's about the artist and the person you're recording with.
Right. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience playing on stage with some of these artists and what you've learned in the process, other than what you just mentioned?
Well, I think having worked with some different artists and different, first of all, live show can be a little unpredictable in terms of you never know how an audience is going to react. Usually if you're with a big artist, you can sort of expect certain things. As a guitar player, you never know when you're going to break a string or when a piece of gear might not work. So I think it's with any artist, it's really learning how to be nimble and agile and being able to adapt to the gig. So having gear that works, maintaining your gear, making sure that within the best of your abilities, not counting in for unforeseen things that are out of your control, is making sure that, strings are new on the guitar, the gear is well maintained, being able to adjust quickly, maybe the set changes, maybe an artist will stop in the middle of a song, and just paying attention and sort of being in tune with what's going on. If you get too lost in your own process, I remember when I was on tour with Julio, we had a musician playing with us who will go unnamed, and he played a lot of different instruments. He played keyboard and guitar and some horns and did all kinds of different stuff. And I remember he was sort of up on stage as a three-ring circus. He had a guitar around his neck. He was playing a keyboard. He was playing some percussion. And at one point, Julio stopped singing and turned around and just stared at him for 2 minutes, and the guy never realized that Julio was not only staring at him, but had quit singing for, a minute and a half or 2 minutes of the show because he was so buried in what he was doing, and he got fired that night. He was an amazing musician, a great guy, good friend of a lot of us, but he was so trapped in his world that he couldn't relate to what was happening outside of himself. So I think, part of being a great sideman and being a great musician is being aware of what's happening at all times and being flexible to change quickly, whether it's stopping in the middle of a song, switching songs quick. If you have again, as a guitar player, a broken string, having a reliable backup guitar, being able to communicate with your tech, making sure all your gear works, and then being able to be part of a group. Being able to play with other musicians is one of the hardest. It sounds easy because we all grow up playing in bands, but really being a sideman that is sensitive to what other musicians are doing it's an art, I believe. It's a skill that you develop, and you can only do it by playing with a lot of musicians and a lot of different kind of musicians, and hopefully a lot of great musicians.
Is there any type of preparation that you find important, either musical, technical, or even physical, for that matter, like warming up?
It's the kind of thing, I don't know how to explain it, but I remember when I first started recording and I first started doing big sessions, I would get almost anxiety. If I was driving, this is before I had my own studio, where I'd be driving to a session and I'd be thinking about, I hope I can play in time, I hope I can get a good sound, and what kind of music is it? I try to find it. That stuff goes away. There's the 10,000 hour rule. You do something for 10,000 hours and you become an expert of it or whatever. So a lot of those anxieties or mental things go away. There's not a lot of, I say at this point, because of the amount I record, I'm recording sometimes 50, 60 hours a week. There's not a lot of mental preparation as much as I like to have a certain set of expectations. I'd like to know if I don't know the client, if it's a new client, or if it's something that I'm a little unaware of, at least, I don't need to hear the song before, but at least to kind of know what kind of music it is going to be doing, so I can sort of get my head into that for the day. I like to know how many songs it is. It's more about just setting a level of expectation for either the day or the project, so I know sort of what I'm in for psychologically, and I can sort of budget my time accordingly. I know, okay, I got to get 5 songs done today and 5 done tomorrow. Then we have to work, an hour and a half or 2 per song, and I can kind of pace what I'm doing. Then in terms of recording a whole project, I think there's a certain, and again, it's all stuff that happens much quicker and much more effortlessly now psychologically, but it's all stuff like, okay, if I know I'm playing 10 songs on a record, everything needs to sound like the same project, but yet you have to give every song its own unique sort of identifiers, whether it's a certain kind of sound or a certain hook, or trying to figure out how to pace an album. So there's some records that are just, a singer-songwriter record where they just want an acoustic guitar and one electric guitar, and that's a vibe that you try to create. But there's a lot of records that are kind of more pop-based where, some songs, are big power ballads that need the big guitars and Guitar Hero, and then other ones, might need a ukulele and a tremolo and a steel string, So trying to figure out how to pace a record so you don't use all your best ideas in the first 3 songs, and then the last 7 you're wondering, all right, what the hell am I going to do now because I got 7 songs, and trying to make every song have its own little thing, but yet give the whole project a cohesive sound. As far as any kind of preparation, I mean, nothing out of the normal thing of, if I know I'm going to have a very heavy day or a busy week, just trying to get rest, trying to be fresh. I mean, we all work a lot, and so, getting a full night of sleep is not always possible, but, trying to get 6-7 hours of sleep, trying to, be on time, be early. Nothing worse than starting a project, 2 days of recording or 3 days of recording and starting the first day off late, or, in the hole an hour or two because you're late or the producer's late. So, and then the only other thing I'd say, because I record myself at my studio, and a lot of the work I do is in my own spot, is making sure the people I'm working for are ready, and they know that I need them to bring files in a certain way, and that the more organized they are, the better it's going to flow for the whole project. Or even if it's 2 songs, like, make sure you have a bass on your thing, or make sure that, the tracks are organized, or that the session opens up, or if you just have audio files that I have a a BPM, or at least, or a click track, or a MIDI file with the map. Just little details that just make the work flow easier. Of course, a lot of times it doesn't happen, and I have to work with just an MP3, and I have to figure out the tempo on my own, and I got to write a chart, and there's no bass, or maybe there's no lead vocal. So then it's just, then you're relying on your musicality and your musicianship to just kind of do what you think is the most appropriate thing, even if you don't have all the factors and variables sorted out.
Okay, great. Could you tell us about your work and routine before, during, and after a session?
Well, I think the before I kind of covered, just making sure everything's ready. As far as the during, my normal, when I start a song, just as an individual song, I'll usually open up the session, make sure I'm hearing everything and that everything's coming out the right output, and that, I'm hearing everything. Once the session is sort of set up and I open some tracks for me to start recording, I'd say 90% of the time there's no chart. So usually my first line of action is to write a chart, and I keep a very, simple kind of, just a lead sheet, chord chart, just with the basic information. If there's any kind of rhythmic hit or anything I should know, I try to make the chart as simple as possible to get it done quickly, and as accurate as I need it to be, so I can keep working without stopping because I didn't write something in. So I just try to put all the critical information that I need to play the song down from top to bottom if I can, and keep the flow going, but not so much where it's going to take me an hour to write a chart. Once I have the chart, by the time I've written the chart and I've heard the song once or twice, I pretty much know what I'm going to do on the whole song. So I already have a good idea what the 5th or 6th guitar part is going to be, and then it's just a matter of doing it. On a normal kind of pop song, if it has acoustic guitars, which I'd say 75% or 80% of the stuff I do usually has acoustics, I prefer to start with the acoustics. It sort of creates a bed for me that, I can sort of, the acoustics usually help really shape the song. If the verses have arpeggios and then it goes into strumming, it's a good way to sort of, build the arc and the flow of the song, and I can see through the acoustics where it's supposed to get bigger, and obviously it's the obvious spots like the choruses or the bridge or whatever. But when the acoustic, if it has acoustics, when the acoustics are done, and I move on to the electrics, I usually try to work in some sort of reverse order from biggest to smallest, in terms of if it's a big power ballad, let's say, once after the acoustics are done, I'll usually start with the power guitars on the chorus or the bridge, or wherever there's the biggest guitars are going to be, I'll start with those, and then I'll start working backwards, and so if then there's some sort of electrics on the chorus that aren't the power chords, I'll do those, and then I'll kind of move to the verses, and then I'll kind of wrap up with either whether it needs a solo or the colors. So I try to build the structure from the bottom up and the frame of the whole thing, and then I try to save the detail work for the end. And sometimes that gets reversed out of order depending on the kind of song. Obviously not every song has power guitars, so some stuff is a little more of a performance where it's a singer-songwriter thing, where I'll just sort of just get a vibe, and that maintains throughout. Not everything is arranged where, okay, here's the verse sound and here's the chorus sound, and I'm going to use this little sound on the bridge or this little thing on the pre-chorus. But so if it's a pop thing that's got a lot of detail on it, I'll sort of do it from reverse, from biggest to smallest. And then as I'm recording, I always try to leave the spaces where I know the details are going to go in. So if I'm doing like effects and colors or little fills or anything, I try to make sure that space is accommodated for, even though I may not be there for another 3 or 4 parts. So it's sort of like you're ranging as you go and finding the special moments where, okay, I got to leave that hole there because I know I'm going to be coming back to that and dealing with that more near the end of the song. And that's, I think, my normal process. And as far as after a session or a song, I'll usually go up then at the end of all the recording of a tracks, and I'll clean it up, do all the crossfades. I like to send my clients on with very tidy sessions where I've done all the crossfades and consolidating the tracks and naming everything properly. And I even, especially if they have Pro Tools, which a lot of people do, I will actually send them with the actual session with my guitars at the volume where I sort of hear them, and the panning, the way I hear them. If I have a guitar on the right doing one thing and left, I try to keep it so when they import the session, it should sound like what I was listening to and what my perspective on it was. Whether they change it or not is up to them, but at least they have a starting place of how I hear all the parts that I recorded. And everything I try to send is very clean. There's no audio files in the session left that I don't want there, and I send them with a very tidy thing with all the tracks cleaned and consolidated, usually to 0. And that's pretty much it in terms of the recording of a song, and then the same could be said for a whole day or a whole project. Just, it sort of repeats per song, the same process.
Great. When talking about equipment, what preferences do you have in the studio and live?
Well, in the studio, because it's, we have the option to stop and redo things. For me, you can't have too many things in the studio, especially if you have the discipline of self-editing and you can, it doesn't, as long as the gear doesn't take priority to the song, having the most options possible, to me is amazing, so having amps and guitars and different types of guitars and the more you have, the better for me. Again, it's knowing how to manage the different amount of sounds and the different possibilities, and not getting too bogged down and looking for something weird or something different, but being able to at least know what you have and know how to use it, so that when you do want to find something a little different or a sound that might work, that you have the experience of getting it. For me, live, especially when you're talking about doing your average kind of gigs. Now, if you're talking about a very specific artist, then you need to emulate the sounds, and I guess it's on a case-by-case basis. Live, I'm the total opposite. If I have a gig or I'm going to play out somewhere, I try to bring as little as possible. I try to bring only what's necessary, so I can have more fun just playing and not spend all the time, having 20 pedals on a pedal board or having a rack of stuff can go wrong. For me, I'd rather keep it as simple as possible and just get to the playing part and just finding how, again, how you fit in on the song without getting too bogged down with, having 9 guitars or, I try to keep it a little more streamlined live. And I know other guys have a totally different approach live. They want everything they have in the studio and whatever, and that's great if you have a big tour budget and a roadie and you have somebody who absolutely knows how to maintain all the gear and troubleshoot in the case there's a problem or a bad cable. But having a giant rack on the road, unless you're, U2 or Van Halen or, some epic tour that has the the funding and the means for that. It's a problem waiting to happen. So I'd rather be able to have I'd rather be able to do a gig where I could just literally plug a guitar into an amp in a pinch and just play and have fun playing. So as little as possible, but what I need for the gig, I would say.
In general, in your general experience as a player, musician, what is important to consider nowadays in order to be more of a successful session player in the industry?
Well, I think specifically about being a session musician, you obviously, the one thing I've seen now for years, for 20 years that I've been out of college and working professionally, the number one problem with musicians, there's a lot of musicians who say they want to be a session player. They say, I want to record, I want to play on records, but at the end of the day, they don't listen to records, maybe pop records. You find a lot of guys that, they can play fusion, they can play like Alan Holdsworth or Steve Vai or any of these number of amazing guitar hero kind of people, but yet they have not sat down and figured out what really makes a great pop guitar player, what makes a session player, a studio musician. And I think that's one of the things that separate people that end up becoming studio musicians and not is it's sort of a humility and knowing your place and saying, okay, despite the fact that I can play something that's 10 or 20 times more difficult, that's not my job. My job now is to serve the song and to serve the artist and to serve the production. And once you figure out how to do that and take out your own musical biases and your own ego, and you can put those on a shelf and just say what is best for the song, the artist, and the production, and you have the skills, and it changes by instrument. Obviously, if you're a great bass player, you can have maybe just one bass. If you're really lucky, you could have 2 or 3 basses or 4 basses, and that's great. But if you're a great bass player, you could have one great bass and one sound and be pretty successful. Drummer, similar. There's more involved with getting great drum sounds in terms of even the heads you use and the tuning and having, a couple great snare drums and cymbals. But guitar is a sort of an interesting animal from the standpoint that there's acoustic guitars, there's nylon string acoustics, steel strings, 12 strings, then when to capo, when not to capo, mandolins and all kinds of little ukuleles and small instruments, cuatros and all sorts of different quirky instruments, banjo. And then you have electric guitar with an entire musical history of different kind of sounds. Is it super hard rock? Is it modern rock? Is it a pop song? Are we trying to make it sound like a 50s thing? And how to get, a wide range of sounds. That's something that takes time and learning and gear and experimentation. So I think having, as a guitar player for me, and for every musician, but a guitar player specifically, has a little more challenge of the sonics of how to get a wide range of sounds and varying degrees of clean, distorted, and then acoustic guitars and then figuring out how they all arrange together. And one of the things that I think that I've gotten really good at is how to make 8 guitar parts sound like one cohesive concept of a track. And that's an art, not, figuring out if you're going to have 6 or 7 or 8 guitar parts that they all don't have to play all the time, and where really something is going to have its moment and find its way so it sounds like an arrangement, almost like a string section or an orchestra or a horn section. Is really finding how everything works together. Outside of the music realm, I'd say it becomes into the same premises as business. It's great to be a great musician, but you have to be a good person. You got to be a cool guy. You have to be a person that people want to go back to because you were open and receptive to their ideas. My job as a session player, I feel like I'm a blank canvas for somebody. Of course, I always have my opinion, and 9 out of 10 times people say, "Well, what are you hearing?" And I'm more than happy to offer my opinion. But there are times when a producer or an artist comes in and says, "I want something that, in my mind, I might think, well, I don't think that's going to work." Or they may say to me, "What do you think that'll work?" And I'll say, "Well, I don't think it'll work, but let's try it." And then, lo and behold, sometimes something works out, and I didn't expect that it would, but for whatever reason, it worked out. And just respecting the fact that other people's opinions are valid, and that they're paying you, and that my job is to accommodate them and what they want. But just being a professional, doing what you're saying you're going to do, be responsible and accountable. These are things that transcend any job. It's the sort of how to be a professional, and how to go from being just, I think, a rank and file employee to really defining your own career and your own path is. I always like to say the world is run by people that show up, and sometimes just getting people to show up and do a good job and do what they say they're going to do is half the battle. So just being a good guy, cool guy, on time, professional, making sure all your stuff works, and just being consistent. I think that's the thing. I know my clients that use me all the time, when they come back, they know they're going to get the same version of me that they've always gotten. It's not going to be like, Dan was a little off his game today, or I don't know, he just didn't sound good. I try to make sure that I maintain a level of professionalism that even if I know I'm a little off, that no one else knows it. And I don't know if I always achieve that, but I think I mostly achieve that. So,
how about equipment? What in terms of equipment, what do you recommend people consider when trying to become a session player in today's world?
I was just talking to a couple young guys half an hour ago about that, and I'd say when you're first starting off, when you don't have necessarily the money or the resources to buy every single thing in the world, you're better off buying 1 or 2 great pieces of gear that are as versatile as possible but sound good. I'd rather have 1 or 2 great guitars that cover, a wide range of stuff than have 6 or 7 crappy guitars. You got to be able to know that you can get a couple of really good sounds, and that that, okay, you may not have an electric 12-string and a baritone and Les Paul in it, but the fact that you can get the sounds that you do get and that you're able to get when you're starting out are consistent. My first 4 years of doing sessions, again, it wasn't as big as stuff that I maybe have done after or do now, but I had a couple things, but they sounded great, and I was able to do the work and get hired again, and with only a handful of guitars, a couple electrics, 1 acoustic, and then you get hired, you make a little money, and you invest that back into the career, and you make a little more money, you buy a couple more guitars. But I'd say having gear that's quality and that is versatile, starting off with a guitar, get a good amp or a good, an amp that has 2 or 3 channels or good sounds, and a guitar that can cover a wide range of stuff. So
cool. And last question is, what do you find important about what you do that people normally wouldn't know or don't ask you about? Does that make any sense? That makes any sense.
It makes sense. I think, I wouldn't phrase that question like that exactly. I think it's more about what people assume and presume that at least in my line of work, and I think the way the industry has kind of evolved, people have come to expect certain things that are not necessarily, taken for granted, that should be part of the deal. Like the fact that I have I'm not going to say a world-class recording studio, but certainly a class of recording studio worthy to record any kind of major record in. The fact that I have the skills as an engineer, certainly to record guitar as good as anybody, I think. I can't imagine many engineers being able to get a better, drastically better guitar sound than the guitar sounds I get as an engineer. And the fact that, the people that hire me, I think, get the benefit of someone who records guitar thinking with the mindset of a producer and an arranger and not just a guitar player. I knew guitar players in the past and people that would just say, well, what do you want me to do? Well, I don't know what I want you to do. What do you think? Well, I don't know. You're the producer. Of course, it's a little frustrating. There's a lot of people sometimes that, they don't have any idea, and they're going down on a record as a producer, and they have zero idea, and they just hire great musicians to do what they do. That doesn't say that's wrong. At least they're good enough producers to know to hire great musicians. But, I think it's now become the kind of thing where it's just sort of assumed that, well, you're going to hire Dan or you're going to hire Lee Levin or a certain kind of musician, and you're getting the benefit of a great studio with the experience of a great engineer, at least to record their own instrument, and the wisdom and experience of a producer and arranger. That all falls under this very small umbrella of guitar player. So they're hiring a guitarist for their record, but they're really getting a studio, an engineer, a producer, an arranger who is treating their project with the same love and consideration that they would treat their own productions. It's sort of sad that a lot of new people, a lot of young producers and artists don't know that that's not always how it is and always how it was. There was a day when there was these things called producers, and they, that's what they did, and they told the musicians what they wanted to play, and there was these great recording studios with amazing engineers that all they did was special. We've had to become sort of everything in one, and I have become an expert on the recording, production, arranging of guitars out of necessity, out of the demand for that. So I think the question isn't so much what people wouldn't know. It's like I always don't think people realize what they're getting for the price of guitar player, and it's just what it is. I mean, not complaining about it. I'm happy that I can do it, and it's what's kept me hireable and what's kept me working, I think for as long as I've been able to do it. So it's just part of the job detail, but I think the real thing is what are people getting that they don't realize that they would not get necessarily everywhere with any guitar player. And I think most people end up realizing it and knowing it. I mean, it's a lifelong of experience and accumulating gear and accumulating expertise and ability. So I hope at least most of my clients leave here with the satisfaction knowing that they got something that they couldn't just get anywhere from anyone. It's my hope. I assume I try to get close to that at least. So.
That's great. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for taking your time. It's great.
I saw in your MySpace that you like good eating, good drinking.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Well, cool, man. Pleasure. Thanks for thinking of me, and hopefully I didn't talk too much.
Oh, I think it was great.
Yeah.
All right.
Every word you say was muy valioso, muy...
All right, man. Well, thank you.
Chao amigos, gracias.
Chao.
Okay.
Hablamos.
Okay. Bye.